Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Francis, and I'm Deputy Director here at Compass. For those of you who are new to Compass, Compass is a progressive organisation. We operate across the progressive left in the UK, and we're mainly known for alliance building around the subjects of democracy, climate, and inequality. And tonight, we are sort of bringing the three together, I would say, to discuss conversations around the climate, because I think we'll touch on all of those themes tonight. I have an amazing array of speakers who I'm going to introduce very shortly, but before I do, I will do a little bit of normal housekeeping. So tonight's event is at the slightly unusual running time of 1 hour and 15, which allows us to squeeze in a little bit of extra time for questions and comments and any participation from you guys out there. And you can start to use the chat function, as I said, or the Q&A function, which we will look at, and we will come to Q&A about halfway through. So we're going to have 4 quite exciting and innovative presentations tonight, and I'll explain a bit more about that in just a second. But just to say that we're going to have 4 quite quick fire presentations and then come on to questions halfway through. That doesn't stop you from asking questions early doors, so do get involved and ask questions now. And then we'll leave about 25 minutes for questions before we finish up at 7:15 exactly. So tonight's format is maybe a bit different from other events that you may have been to. We are all getting quite bored of Zoom at this point. I mean, I feel like I've been saying that for already 18 months. But one of the great things about Zoom is its ease of access. And we have panelists tonight from all around the country, and all of you on the call from all around the country. But one of the sad things about it is it lacks that kind of energizing buzz. So the way that we thought to introduce that would be using what we call a Petra Kutcher style of presentation tonight. And that basically means it's going to be a rapid fire presentation. We're going to see a lot of visual aids for the speakers. They're going to speak to those visual aids and pictures. And that allows us to kind of understand the topic in more detail, maybe get a glimpse into some photos and pictures from the different parts of the UK, and really get energized and take some ideas away that we can use in our own work and in our own regions and places. So to say a little bit about how this event came about, we've been doing a series of events over the past year and a series of collaborative partnerships with the Rapid Transition Alliance. So a big shout out to them who've been supporting us on this work and working in partnership with us. My colleague Samuel, who's on the call tonight, is going to be around to put helpful links in the chat, and he'll link you to Rapid Transition Alliance. They do amazing work to uplift and kind of explain and showcase examples from all around the country and indeed around the world of rapid transition, which is the process of transitioning to a post-carbon economy and society. And they have an amazing series of ideas that you can use from the really small to the really big. We're really excited to work with them on that. And if you know anything about Compass, you'll know, as I said at the start, that we care about those key themes of democracy, climate, and inequality. But we also really care about that happening through alliance building politics. And tonight we're going to hear from 4 politicians at different levels of government who've been working with other people, and maybe those people are other parties from other parties and working with parties in government, and maybe those people are different people in the constituency and in the community who they have built alliances with in order to get this to happen. So one of the things we care about at Compass as well is also this question of uplifting examples from local government. So we talk a lot about national government at Compass, and we focus a lot of national government, but we also know that progressives are in power in this country, all across the UK, and they're doing really interesting and exciting things on really urgent questions like climate. They're not waiting for permission, they're not waiting for the national government to do anything about it, they're getting stuck in and doing that work. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists here tonight, and I'm really excited that they could all join us, and also actually 5, because we've got Steve on the call tonight, who I didn't expect to be here until a little bit later on. So we have Jamie Driscoll. Jamie is the Labour Mayor for North of Tyne. We have Lorna Dupre, she's a Lib Dem councillor at Cambridgeshire Borough Council level. We have Claire Waitman, who's a Green councillor in Surrey, and also Steve Williams, who's a Green councillor in Surrey, and they're doubling up because we didn't know whether the both of them could make it tonight. But it looks like they're here. Welcome, Steve. Good to have you. And we have Katie Mansfield, who's a Lib Dem councillor in the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames. I'm going to let them introduce themselves properly, and we're going to go roughly in this order. So we're going to take Jamie first, then we're going to go Lorna, then we'll go Katie, and we'll end up with Claire and Steve, however they want to double act on. And then we'll come to questions halfway through. So without further ado, I wanted to pass it over to Jamie. I wanted to, any last words before we start the presentation, Jamie? How are you feeling about this new style of format, and anything you want to say about the topic before we jump right in.
Well, you described it as a presentation, Francis, and I think you might be done under the Trades Descriptions Act, because this is a random collection of slides and I can't remember what they are. So you're going to see a politician floundering around making things up, which is unusual for me as opposed to the Prime Minister.
This is excellent. As we say, no next slide, please, on this one. This is going to be, I mean, let's be honest, we're throwing politicians in at the deep end, and that's exactly what we aim to do. We aim to entertain as well as inform here at Compass. So I'm going to start to share my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. Can everybody see this? Give me a thumbs up or a hello from the speakers if you can see it.
Ah, there we are, it's arrived.
Yes, yeah. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start the timer, and we're going to kick straight off with you. Ready and go.
So I was very much a grassroots activist long before becoming a politician. And when we talk about a climate coalition, we tend to think of the political parties. Of course, this is an intergenerational coalition, because you can see, you might recognise the baldy bloke with the beard there, standing in front of his son, who's now taller than me, who was a member of XR. So what do you do if you want to get stuff really done? Well, God, 20 seconds is a long time, isn't it? I went and became the mayor. So I'm a metro mayor, not a local authority mayor. And we have powers over some house building, an investment fund. I don't have transport powers yet. I've been negotiating for them, I've nearly got them. And it does give you an opportunity to do things, particularly in terms of bringing businesses together and all sorts of other partners to get things done. And that's my patch. Now, the Northeast, you've got old coal mining, shipbuilding communities, things like that, but a huge rural area. And when it comes to things like what you're going to do in terms of species, rewilding, all of these things, then you need to bring a lot of people with you. And we have a multi-party combined authority. My manifesto, first day, was declaring my climate emergency, which I did, and it was all about the Green New Deal. And so there was promises there about a green industrial revolution, about what we can do in terms of good work in the just transition, which is just as important if we're going to take people with us on that subject of a coalition. And that then put it up against reality, because my first day, there were literally more TV cameras than there were staff. And I had to build the organisation. No sooner had I got my senior management team in place than COVID hit. So all of the things that we've tried to do in that meantime, we've managed to do really well. Every job we make is in the green industries or in low impact industries. We've got climate emergency put in anything, but it's meant coalitions with businesses, with the business organisations, with the trade unions, and it's been a case of building the aeroplane while we're flying it. Although aeroplane is probably the wrong example, since we're talking about climate transition. And that seems to be a picture of me and Andy Burnham, which I have honestly no idea what that's there. I think there might have been a pun in here about hit the ground running. Yeah, well, let's say active travel is also important when you're doing some running around. And we did run a citizens' assembly on climate emergency. And that was really good. It took some getting through, and it was actually the Tories and Northumberland, the only people who wouldn't back it, but I pushed it through anyway. And that coalition of people, including farmers in rural Northumberland, younger people in the city, climate skeptics, really important to get these people in. And what came out of that was fantastic, particularly, it was really encouraging. Because when you get a bunch of people together, they got to choose their own questions, which experts they wanted to hear from. And that puts you in this space where you have the confidence that once people are informed, they agree with it, once it's cut through. And it gave me the authority to get everybody in. So when we're doing investments, we're saying nothing in the high carbon industries. We've put loads of money into offshore wind, and it's creating a lot of good green jobs. Lots in terms of what we're doing in our Green New Deal Fund, which is launched, which is helping smaller businesses get access to capital to do things. And decarbonisation is the basis of it. So the entire mission of the North of Tyne now is written in at zero carbon, zero poverty, which again speaks back to that thing. If you're going to take people with us, you've got to answer that question. Why should I give up my car when I've got a minimum wage job and I've got to drop the kids off and then go to my first job and then my second job? You can't just do it on the basis of the scare stories, the world is burning. I would imagine everyone on this call is aware of it. Behind me, if you have a look, I've got Our Final Warning, that Mark Linus book there. And it is a reality. But it's only going to work if we can take people with us. Now, there's a campaign slide for me on the Green Industrial Revolution. It requires taking businesses with us as well. It requires a progressive alliance of everyone we can build. And it is one of the interesting things is I was talking to the business community representatives recently, and they were saying, look, the government were talking about loads of this before COP. We've not heard anything since, but we all still want to do it. In terms of communities, that's one of the things that we fund, our crowdfunder. And this is what's called Greening Wingrove, which is about biodiversity, which is about dealing with food poverty aspects, a lot of community food kitchens and things like that, community gardens. And these are in the terrace streets in Tyneside. I think that's a symbolic representation of a progressive alliance. What I love about this is if you look carefully, there's little faces poking around the side. And that for me is the best part of a progressive alliance. It's about bringing in people who see it beyond party politics, because we've got to take everybody with us. And it's got to be about telling the truth. I love, this is my personal motto. If we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we really are. And I did get some flack off various people, off some of the people who are doing open cast mining, wanting extra things like that. I strongly opposed it. But it's amazing what it's brought everybody to do. And it's that thing, if you tell the truth, and you actually find a lot of people in different parties can work together. British Folk, we've got the 2 gigafactories to decarbonise, to electrify Britain's transport. So there's 3,500 jobs in that. That's one of the things we've done. There's another 4,500 in our other jobs pipeline and more coming. So that approach of saying, no, this is a just transition is really working. We have control of the skills budget, so make sure all sorts of people are getting trained to get these jobs, because that is another issue. If you're going to start saying, look, there's going to be no high carbon jobs anymore, people want this financial security. And that's how we're going to get to net zero. Net zero itself, I prefer zero carbon, because we've got to make sure it's not just about people saying we can continue to pollute and we'll just make poorer people pay for it. So there's always the issue of language. And again, it's about not being dogmatic about that language. It's about taking people with you first. And then you have a quiet word and say, how about zero carbon rather than net zero? And I just love this one. This sums it up. What if it's all a big hoax and we've created a better world for nothing? Because it is about a just transition. For us, it's zero carbon, zero poverty. It's worth doing anyway. Well, that wasn't a total car crash.
Yay! Excellent. Well done, Jamie. This is first Patrick Hutch, everybody. I think you absolutely nailed it. It's harder than it looks, folks.
Seeing the slides come up and thinking, what do I say about that one?
You know it all. It's completely, it's a perfect brief. It's what you say every day. Thanks so much for going first, Jamie. I really appreciate that. And for folks who have questions, get them loaded up in the Q&A. I can see that there's some brilliant comments already coming through in the chat. But if you have questions and want to get those in the Q&A, you can do that, and you can upvote other people's as well. So get your questions in early, folks. We'll be coming to questions out after all of the presentations. So Lorna, it's your turn to go into the hot seat. How you are feeling about this style of presentation? Have you ever done it before? Is this new to you?
Never done it before. And how do you follow Jamie? I ask, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to find your presentation. It's the Cooperate for the Climate one. And I'm going to try to make my mouse actually work better at this. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I will kick you off when it's ready to go. Can you see my screen, everybody? Excellent. Okay, jobs are good in. All right, Lorna, are you ready for me to hit the start button?
Yep, go for it.
All right, let's go.
Right. Cooperating for the climate, then. I'm Councillor Lorna Dupre, and I'm a member of the leadership team at Cambridgeshire County Council. In this presentation, I hope to be able to show you some of the ways in which we cooperate internally within the council and collaborate externally beyond the boundaries of our local authority to achieve our climate and environmental objectives. We are very ambitious for the climate, and they are this is one of our top priorities. So the local elections in May 2021 resulted in a change of control on Cambridgeshire County Council and a new agreement between three groups, Liberal Democrats, Labour and Independents, to run the council together as a joint administration with a multi-group leadership team of 5 known as the Quintet. And there we are signing the agreement. A noticeable effect of this has been the massive change for the better in gender balance on the council. And talking of balance, this is the composition of the council since May 2021. Cooperation in these circumstances is essential, with strong joint working among the 3 groups in the joint administration, that's everybody except the Blue, and cooperation with the Blue members where possible. We have a majority of 5 on the council and a majority of 1 on each committee. We have a committee system rather than a leader and cabinet model, and we have committee chairs rather than portfolio holders, and all decisions are played out in public. So I chair the Environment and Green Investment Committee, which is responsible for climate change and energy projects, biodiversity, flood and water, waste and minerals, heritage, spatial planning, and digital connectivity. And that was Stony Camp, which is an Iron Age hill fort, which I'll tell you about later if you want to know. So a smaller number of councillors, half from my committee and half from strategy and resources, form a cross-party advisory group on green investment and utilities, which meets regularly to steer officers and develop expertise in environmental projects. And we receive regular risk reports like that one there. Our carbon footprint in Cambridge is 25% higher per person than the national average, but very different between the different Cambridgeshire districts. We've updated our environment strategy with a new focus on working with business and communities to reduce our carbon footprint, improve biodiversity. We've achieved bronze status with our carbon literacy project, and we're moving towards gold. So our new strategy sets an ambitious target of 2045 for Cambridgeshire to reach net zero. One of our biggest challenges is peatland, which you see some of there, and it's hard to overstate the sheer complexity of the decisions facing us over peatland as we try to balance flood risk, rewatering, carbon emissions, food production and development, of course, and that's with Fen there. We've inherited a good number of projects from the previous administration, which we supported in opposition. One of these is at Swaffham Prior to get 300 homes in a small village near Cambridge off oil. This project originated within the community, and it's been designed to remove the upfront costs of installation so everyone can take part. It involves sinking boreholes into a council-owned field, the building of an energy centre, the piping of heat under the ground into individual properties, and brings together all sorts of partners. We've developed a 12 megawatt solar park here at Triangle Park Farm near Soham, and we're looking to develop another in the same area. The new scheme will generate the equivalent volume of electricity required to supply around 12,000 homes and prevent the emission of around 230,000 tonnes of CO2. The use of land for energy or arable farming is a continuing dilemma. We have a number of park and ride sites around Cambridge to reduce traffic congestion into the city, and we're developing smart energy grids on these to charge private vehicles and electric buses and supply power to nearby commercial customers. This is the one at the park and ride at St Ives, which is underway and being built, and some of the steel structures are already in evidence. We're working through a programme as a council to replace oil and gas boilers in schools with more environmentally friendly alternatives. The new joint administration has changed the criteria for that scheme to enable more schools to qualify, and this is the official opening of the new air source heat pumps installed at Shirley School in Cambridge. Our Cambridgeshire Retrofit Partnership brings together the 6 Cambridgeshire districts, targeting those most in need for home retrofits and setting up procurements for the able to pay market to access as well. Last year's Solar Together auction, run under the auspices of iChooser, saw around 12,000 solar panels and 670 batteries installed on homes around the county, which is the equivalent of 4 megawatts of solar generation, with even more interest in this year's auction, which has just concluded. We're one of the most biodiversity deprived counties in the country, due in part to our extensive tracts of agricultural farmland. 88% of land in the fens is cultivated, and the fertile soils account for about half of all Grade 1 land in England. Water management is difficult and complex in our county, from the artificially drained sub-sea level fen landscape of the north to the drying chalk streams of the south. We also own the largest public sector estate in England and Wales, 33,000 acres with about 160 tenant farmers. We're refocusing the management of the estate towards environmental rather than just financial goals, and our rural estate team is on hand to support tenant farmers with their business plans and with new systems such as ELMS. Love the poppies in that one. We've recently agreed to market one piece of the farm estate, Lower Valley Farm in Fulbourn, southeast of Cambridge, for biodiversity net gain. This will enable developers in South Cambridgeshire as a last resort to offset their BNG obligations into active management of this site for biodiversity. We've also changed our cutting programmes for protected road verges for positive management to improve their levels of biodiversity. We collaborate with CUSPI, the Cambridge University Science and Policy Exchange, where postgraduate students work together in small teams to answer policy research questions we pitch to them and report back to us. Recent pieces of work, they've researched low carbon advisory service to local small and medium enterprises, carbon insetting for businesses to support communities to decarbonise, and scoping what low carbon heat networks could look like for local market towns. I mentioned earlier the tension between land use for energy generation and land use for food production and food security. The Food Farming and Countryside Commission is working in Cambridgeshire to develop a trial for a land use framework, a process that has the potential to deliver integrated, collaborative and place-based decision-making and optimises multifunctional benefits from land. The County Council is an active participant in the leadership group for this project. We're unique in being part of a mayoral combined authority, the only rural combined authority in the country. Not unique in having a mayor, of course, we have one on this call. This has presented a number of opportunities, but also significant challenges. It's the route through which government funding is channeled, but not necessarily the repository of the expertise to deliver the outcomes. I'm sure that's not true in Jamie's part of the world. The Combined Authority established an independent climate commission under Baroness Brown, which reported in early 2021 on the climate challenges facing the Combined Authority area and the actions which are needed to address them. Some of its work, especially on peatland, as I've already mentioned, is ongoing, and other recommendations are being developed for implementation across the various tiers of government. And finally, work's been taking place nationally between local councils, the LGA, Hughes Hall and UK 100 on how locally determined contributions could play a part in COP27 to add an international influence dimension. We're bringing together public and private sector bodies to develop our own Cambridgeshire COP as we move towards COP27 in Egypt. That's personally driven by the leader of the council and evidences our commitment to cooperation at local, national and even international level.
Yay! That was amazingly done, and packed so much information there, Lorna, into like a very short, tight presentation. I felt like I just got a download of what it's like to live in your area. And as you were saying, some really fascinating similarities and contrasts with Jamie. And I think what I love about talking to people who are working in local government is just the specificity of this particular part of the UK that you're in. You know, the references to peatland and farming and agriculture, very different to different parts of the UK. And we often don't hear about the work that's being done at those levels. So that was a fascinating presentation. Thank you. Save your questions, folks, or rather, don't save them. Stick them in the Q&A function or stick them in the chat and get them come running through. I can see a couple of them have already come through. But we'll have 2 more presentations and then you get to ask questions for anyone. And if you have a question for a specific speaker, you can always flag it in the Q&A. But we're moving with fast pace and keeping the energy up on to Katie. Katie, how are you feeling about this presentation? I'm asking this a bit like a game show host.
I've never done anything like this before, and I'm a little bit worried about the lack of control.
Just sit back, relax, and let me do the controlling for you. No next slide, please, on this one. All right, so I'm going to find out.
I haven't quite finished what I've got to say on this now. So it's good.
Back up. Yes, it's a powerful format, but it's certainly a challenge. And we talked about how difficult it is to sort of speed up and slow down. I think that's part of the challenge that we all face to keep it relevant. Okay, so let's see if you can see my screen in a second. Just going to find you, share my screen, and can you see my screen? Wait for it to come through. Yes, thumbs up.
I can, yeah.
So are you ready to go, Katie? I will count you in, and you'll be ready to go in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Katie Mansfield. I'm a councillor in the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames, and I'm Vice Chair of the Transport and Air Quality Committee within that borough. We're a Lib Dem administration, and despite the fact that we've got 48 out of the 54 council seats, we have a constructive opposition in the Green Party, and I know the leader of the opposition's here on this call today. So hi, Richard. I'm going to have to be careful what I say. And we've got one Tory as well. But even though we've got a large majority, we need to work together, because we need to work together across other councils within London. We need to work together with the London Mayor and the London Assembly, and with our constituents and residents within the borough, to make sure that we can address the climate emergency that we declared in 2019, and so that we're going to become carbon neutral by 2030 as a council. This has had a major impact on some of the things that we're trying to do. And two of the things I'd just like to highlight is that we are rewriting the draft, or we're rewriting the local plan. It's currently in draft format. But in order to get this as something that really can address the travel, sustainable travel, the carbon neutral developments and the life cycle emissions of everything, and make sure that it's a local plan that we're really proud of, we haven't worked in isolation on this. We've worked very closely with the Green Party in opposition. And we've also worked very closely with pressure groups and groups who have interest, and also with consultations with the local community. We've had a number of sessions, online Zoom sessions, where they've also got involved in it. The second one where people have been involved is the active travel strategy that we've also done to kind of address the climate emergency, trying to get more carbon neutral forms of transport out there. And again, we work very closely with other political parties. We've worked very closely with pressure groups, disability groups, other people who might struggle with some of the active travel policies that we bring in, to make sure that when we're bringing them about, it meets the needs of everybody. One of the first things we did 4 years ago when we came into administration was we introduced 20 miles an hour. Now that was really, really controversial in the local area at the time. It was something that was supported by people, but there was a huge group of people against it. And what we really appreciated was the fact that a progressive alliance of people really got behind this and tried to bring it about. We had groups, we had parties, the Labour Party, the Green Party, everybody saying this was the right thing to do to bring down the carbon emissions in the area and make it safer so more people come into active travel. And it's been successful. We've seen a reduction in the speeds, and we've seen reduced carbon dioxide emissions. We haven't stopped there. We've also looked at things like anti-idling policy, persuading motorists to turn off their engines outside schools, school streets, working with the local community, working with the schools, working with the groups that try to, Mums for Lungs and other groups like that, who really do try to help bring about these reduction in carbon emissions and help us communicate that message, which is one of the hardest things that we have to do, is bringing on board other people. We've brought in initiatives to support people being able to move to active travel and to carbon neutral modes of transport. We've brought in an ability, well, first of all, the ability to park cargo bikes, which was always a problem in the past, but also we've brought in a renter scheme for cargo bikes, partly so people can try them out, partly so they can use them when they have specific trips to do with children, or quite often, as we've seen, with shopping as well. But the cargo bikes have come in successfully. In addition, one of the big problems that I know we've got in London is people who do want to cycle being able to store their bikes and being able to actually have access to that mode of transport, because of the fear of bicycle theft, not having the gardens, not having the space internally. So we've installed, I think it's about 75 of these hangars on residential streets. We have a program of installing a lot more going forward. We've had 750 requests to put these in, which shows the popularity many of them locally. We've also brought in electric charging points, and from a real standing start when we came in 4 years ago, we've become one of the best London boroughs with regard to electric charging points, bringing about the opportunity for people to reduce their carbon emissions by moving to a different mode of transport. It's not a panacea, as Richard Bennett would always tell me, but it is something that we can really help tackle the carbon emergency locally. We've got a very high level of car usage in Richmond historically. We've also worked with a number of different groups of partnerships of councils across London. So we've worked in a South London partnership. Here we've opposed the expansion of Heathrow. We've introduced a Green Skills Academy, working in conjunction with other people around, other councils around who have similar interests in us being able to do that. It hasn't been limited to just the South London partnership. We've also had the West London partnership, which is a different group with different interests, but also coming together. And that's been really important when we've tried to bring about scope 3 improvements, things that are outside of our direct control. So working with other councils to see how we can best do that. Not just about bringing the improvements, but standardizing the metrics, making sure we can understand and really measure the impact that we're having. And working with other councils has really helped us manage to deliver those. We've also worked with the London Assembly and with the London Mayor. So we're participating in an e-scooter trial across the London Borough of Richmond. We've got it in 28 locations. It's there for 12 months so that we can assess this as a mode of transport and put recommendations through, collect the data and work with the London Assembly to see what we think is the right approach to scooters. And we've worked with TfL, part of kind of like the transport remit of the London Assembly, to bring in cycle lanes across the borough. We've had very, very few cycle lanes historically. We've been introducing them for the last 4 years and have a great plan to do more going forward. You can see here, this is one on Kew Road, and that cycle lane alone, by putting in those kind of segregated lanes, increased the cycling threefold. So 3 times the number of people started using the cycling immediately on introduction of the segregated scheme. And it was different sorts of cyclists. It was the families and people who weren't professional. Other panel London initiatives, I think we had reference to it from Cambridge as well with Solar Together, working in big groups of people coming together and being able to deliver against, make things cheaper, make the solar power cheaper by buying in bulk, working in terms of the communication on climate action and the green home grants. So really making sure that we utilize the relationships we've got across London to bring about the right opportunities for people in our local area. But it's not just about the initiatives we brought out. Now, somebody was talking to me this morning and said that there's evidence now that the second most important thing you can do for climate change, full stop, is the communication and bringing people on board and engaging them, and that would be what makes the real difference. So firstly, we've had our own youth summit. We've got all the local schools together and come up with ideas. We did have the advantage of Attenborough being a local resident who would certainly make most people want to come along and discuss opportunities. We followed that up with, specifically for young people, giving them a grant which they can choose what they want to spend that money on. It has to be on climate change, but some of the ideas that they came up with in the Youth Summit, we're actually going to activate and giving them some money in order for them to take that forward. We've done as well, we've had our own Climate Week, which was incredibly successful. We had over 1,000 people engaged specifically in coming to the events, despite the COVID restrictions and everything, where we were delivering practical advice on everything from transport, energy, food waste, biodiversity. We were getting people on board, and with our other local groups, so we're working with Habitats and Heritage, we're working with Mums for Lungs, we're working with all of these other groups that together, getting people to kind of understand what they can do, understand what the opportunities are, and bringing together that alliance that can ultimately deliver more for climate change. Thank you.
Hey, once again, just so much packed in, and each of those individual things, I was like, hang on, I've got a question about that, and time goes off. But that's brilliant, Katie, and just so inspiring. I don't know about other people on the call, but I find it so uplifting to hear all of this is happening. And I feel like often people don't hear about these things unless they're living in the borough or the neighbourhood in which it's happening. But of course, it's happening across the country. And this, as you rightly say, is about alliances much more than just between political parties. It's with businesses, as Jamie is saying, is with industry, as Lorna was saying. It's also with the community. And it was wonderful to see those school children there and having the ideas of them all coming up with ideas for the climate, which, as we know, is a really salient issue amongst young people. So thank you so much, Katie. And last but by no means least, we have Claire. I don't know if Steve is going to be on hand, I think, to answer some questions in the Q&A, but he's going to really throw you in the deep end to do the presentation by yourself, is how I've understood it. Yes, okay. Finally, folks, get your questions in there. We're about to come to questions straight after Claire. So if you have questions for any of the 4 speakers tonight, do get involved and get your questions in the Q&A. You can also upvote other people's questions, and that leads to them be more likely to be answered. So I will get my ducks in a row and put your presentation up. And it's held. The Zoom gods have smiled upon us tonight. Is that working for folks? I am sharing the screen, and yes. Okay, so Claire, how are you feeling? Are you ready to the hot seat of the?
I think I'm going to be vamping quite a lot on some of these.
Don't worry, as you've had 3 pros go ahead of you, so you know what.
I know.
It's
a raise the stakes a little bit.
All right, over to you, Claire. Here we go.
So I sort of read the brief, and I thought I would talk from the perspective of what has the ability to collaborate with progressives in a cross-party fashion, like what has that done for the environment in our tiny little area? So we live in Surrey. So I'm the deputy leader of Godalming Town Council. I'm a member of the Green Party, and I've actually only been a member of the council for about 6 months now. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about was implemented and has been put forward by my colleagues, so I will try to give credit where credit is due. We also, a bit like Cambridge, there was a big transition. So pre-2019, this is what the Borough Council, Waverley Borough Council, looked like. Now, this is the bluest of blue areas. Jeremy Hunt is our MP. And that is a situation regarding the ability to get anything done for the environment, like nothing. Like 50 out of 57 councillors were Tories. Boom, 2019, you can see the pictures changed quite a lot. We have a number of progressives. The administration is led by a cooperative agreement between the Farnham Residents Association and the Liberal Democrats. But importantly, it's not just two groups essentially running the show. There's a huge amount, and my council leaders on the call. Hi, Paul. So I need to be careful what I say, but like Katie as well. But that has enabled our ability to get things done for the environment. A progressive collaboration has enabled us to, number one, start declaring climate emergencies. So Godalming Town Council, shortly after the local elections in 2019 in July, was able to declare a climate emergency. The public gallery was packed on that day. It was also the hottest day of the year, so the kind of climate gods were sending a message. Because although town council is sort of at the parish level is sort of small and teeny, but we've also got to do our bit. It's not just about looking at what the larger levels can do. So initiative we've just done now recently in a recent session of our town council was looking at how we can, as a town council, reduce emissions for all of the properties that Godalming Town Council owns. We have already achieved our reduction target for Scope 2 emissions, and we're on track for reducing our Scope 1 emissions. How we're doing this is by replacing the gas boilers in properties with electric ones or heat pumps. And our aim to do this is by 2025, not 2030. So we are very ambitious. Waverley Borough Council then followed up and declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. That motion was put forward by my colleague who's on this call and listening, Steve Williams. Yay, Steve! I think because the Borough Council has more ability to, shall we say, get stuff done compared to the Town Council, we've really seen at the level of policy a lot of movement in the last 3.5 years. And I'm extremely hopeful that we'll continue to see a lot more things. So these are the sort of the 7 areas where Waverley Borough Council is looking, to implement the kind of climate change strategy and what they're doing. And we've, I could jump for hours about all the things that have been going on in sort of in multiple levels. So we talked about the organizational emissions. I mean, that's things like making sure that the leisure centres, where they are being rebuilt or redesigned, what can we do to make sure they're not just like, leaking heat, changing energy suppliers, etc., to make sure reusable energy. Lots of support for active travel. I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Housing as well. I'm going to be talking about that in a second, because we've got some really exciting projects which have already started, and they're already being implemented regarding the use of passive house. But from a collaborative thing, so if you think about that little graphic that I showed with the people, what we call our blue people graphic, where we started, like one of the benefits of progressive collaboration is that although we have 2 Greens on Waverley Borough Council and 2 Labour members, we also have cross-party representation on the executive. So it's not just about, the largest groups, getting to kind of, hold the tiller as well. So our Steve Williams, who's also on the call, is the portfolio holder for environment and transport. So that means that, when you have a Green in the room, you're able to sort of do a lot. And the same thing as well, when you have Labour representation as well. So one of the things that Waverley Borough Council has been doing is working on our carbon neutrality action plan. Sorry, Jamie, yes, we did talk about carbon neutral rather than net zero here. There was no real team for sustainability before the transition in 2019. We now have a team of 4. Steve says, he told me the other week, last week, that they're actually recruiting more people because there's more demand for people. And Climate Emergency UK voted our CNAP the 5th best in the country. So county councils are coming at an average of 40%. Ours was voted the best in Surrey. And this was, in the news recently. So in terms of what we're actually doing locally, we're kind of punching above our weight in terms of how we're actually being scored on the measurable impacts that we are having in our area. As I was saying, it's always very helpful to have a Green in the room, because we've got new policies, to increase biodiversity, tree policies. For example, we're really looking at, things like tree planting, but also planning, making sure that, people, want to cut down a tree. Well, you got to replace that tree. You can't just like hack it down like you used to be able to do. So it's about conserving the things that we have, and actions like no mow May as well, which is controversial with some residents, as I'm sure many of you know, but something that we think is worth doing. One thing we're really, really proud of is a 75% reduction in use of pesticides, particularly use of glyphosate, only in 3 years. And that remaining 25% is largely on land, which Waverley Borough Council is contractually obliged to do things like spraying the verges that are managed actually by Surrey County Council. And so we're hoping to sort of move forward and eliminate some of those as we go forward into the next administration next year. A really exciting project to encourage active travel, the Guildford Godalming Greenway, which is going to be a 7-kilometre long not just a cycle path, but kind of an active travel network, and it will have hubs in order that it's not just one route, it's potentially going to be extended. We've had the phase 1 consultation, 66% of the public who responded to it. We had over 1,000 responses to it, which normally people are like, oh god, local government asking their opinion. But 1,000 people responded, and 66% of them said yes, we're in favor of it. Here's a picture of me and Steve. Hi, Steve. In front of 2 of the passive house, single-bedroom solar housing, modular homes that we've actually put in my ward in Binscombe. And these were, I might be misremembering this, several months ago. I think these ones in Binscombe were for long-term homeless people in order to sort of transition them out of, to help them get into the sort of social housing. And I believe, and probably Paul's going to correct me at some point, or Steve, that we have got other ones going up in Oxford Ridge, which is another part of Godalming as well. So these are houses that are built to passive house standards in terms of 6. So is that 6? Several more coming, yes, thank you. And then one of the things about progressive collaboration, it adds value for a political sense. Hi, Paul. That's me and Paul on polling day. And the picture on the right is actually a tree walk that I arranged with on the chap on the left is our tree officer. And in that picture, we have 2 Labour councillors, 2 Liberal Democrats, and 2 Greens, who are all kind of, extremely friendly, just kind of chatting along. And there to find out about what's going on in terms of trees and biodiversity in our area. So yeah, it adds value on the doorstep. People are very much in favour of it. I, as I said, was recently elected only in a by-election end of last year, and I had people who were saying, well, I'm a Labour supporter, but I understand what we're doing here with progressive collaboration in Godalming now because we have a history of doing it for the last 3 years. And the same thing, I have Liberal Democrats, coming up to me and saying, we understand what progressive collaboration means. Therefore, it enables more progressives to get elected. So yeah, it's a good thing you can sell on the doorstep from a political party.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, and hello. And you got through the entire presentation without being interrupted, and then right on cue.
Disney is doing my babysitting in the background.
Like he knows his cue. It's just perfect. Hello. So all of you got to see Let's try as well. A nice little cameo there.
Thank you.
So a huge round of applause to all of our amazing speakers. That was a whistle-stop stop tour through the country and through all of these amazing initiatives. And to say that obviously this event is bringing together 2 things, which Claire nicely summed up for us at the end. This idea that collaboration and alliance building helps you do more things, especially when it comes to climate action and especially when it comes to speaking to different demographics, different parts of the constituency. You can speak with different voices when you go through cross-party methods, but also when you try to build alliances across your constituency with businesses, with other movements, with civil society. So I know that we've now got a bunch of really exciting questions in the Q&A. I've been seeing them flooding in, but they're all secret for me because I couldn't see them while I was showing my screen. So over to you, Samuel. Have you got our first questioners? We'll probably take them in like rounds of 3. Take the first 3, and Steve, also you're welcome to jump in on the questions front.
Okay, so yes, so I'm going to be bringing in Tony. I'm going to bring in bring in Tony firstly, and I will bring in, I'll say Alison's question because I don't think I've got a response from her yet to say if she wants to come in, and if I will see Vicky, bring Vicky as well to also speak.
Okay, let's start with Tony, and then we'll go maybe to Alison and to Vicky then after that.
Correct.
Hi, Tony. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm in Newcastle, and well, Jamie's answered the first one, but I'll just put that again, which is why is the Labour Party, and I'd like to ask that also about the Lib Dems, doesn't support XR. But the main question was about low traffic neighbourhoods, and there's been a lot of opposition to that around the country, but it usually goes away after they get instituted. So I wondered if what people's experience was with tackling the opposition or defusing the opposition to low traffic neighbourhoods, which is one of the ways, obviously, of reducing the transport emissions.
Brilliant, thanks, Tony. And obviously a very topical question. I think everyone will have heard about that over the pandemic. Let's come to Alison next. Alison, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, yes, I'm part of Compass. I'm part of UBI Lab Manchester. I might have misread the runes slightly as I jumped in with my UBI question right at the beginning. I don't know if this is appropriate. You can all shut me up if I'm not. But I wanted to ask Jamie what he thought of UBI as part of a just transition. I'm in the Green Party, and it's one of the things that drew me to the Green Party is that at the time they had, they were one of the parties that were really talking about it. And it seems to me if we're going to get this smooth and just transition, we're going to need something that fills in the gaps for people between, they're not going to be digging in mines one day and then retrofitting houses on Monday, are they? So that there's going to need to be transitions, particularly for communities. That's my question.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Alison. I think it's very relevant. Obviously, I would say that given that we house the Basic Income Project, but yeah, I think they all fit together, and especially about this question about inequality and the question about transitioning. I think that is an important point. Over to you, Vicky. Do you want to take the final question for this round?
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
we've got you loud and clear.
Okay. Really interesting contributions. Thank you very much. But I'm really aware that a lot of you are in a positions of authority and decision making, and I really wanted to stress that whole thing about, firstly, that it's not enough just to make the decisions and put them into place. You've got to get the public on board, and it's got to be a really important part of whatever strategy you're adopting, because if you don't get the public on board, you know, you're going to flounder. So I'm interested to know your response to that. The second is, for me, the importance of a movement, whether it's food banks, whether it's allotments, whether it's all kinds of issues to do with how people want to do things differently and in a green fashion. That is such an important part of educating people, changing people's perspectives, gaining momentum, gaining credibility. That's something I think, you know, you politicians really need to take on board. So I'm interested to know what your response to those 2 points, which I think is like the strategic approach. It's not just like doing the right thing. It's like you've got to get people on board, otherwise it will all go to pot.
Absolutely. And we know there are some people on the other side of this argument who are interested in seeing things not go in this direction. We always got to remember that not everybody is pro this agenda. So I'm going to come to each of the panelists. Feel free to answer any of the questions that came up in that first round. You don't have to answer all of them, of course. We will have probably time for a second brief round of questions. Let's do sort of reverse, or not reverse order. We'll come back to the beginning. Let's come to you, Jamie, first, and then we'll go Jamie, Lorna, Katie, Claire, and anything from Steve as well. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Francis. Hi, Tony. The Labour Party is itself a progressive alliance. Let's not remember the idea that there is a necessarily agreement across, 400,000 members is not going to be the case. And I'm always of it was on one of the slides, wasn't it? If we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we really are, and stop worrying about negative headlines and just tell the truth, is my view. And I think I put in the chat an article I wrote when I was supporting XR during the blockade of the print works a couple of years ago. Low traffic neighbourhoods in, I think it might be fairly close to where you live. I have a feeling I know you are, Tony, in the nicest possible sense, because I think my son's spoken about you. In Acorn Road in Jesmond, they were putting this in. And one of the traders in particular was, this is terrible, it's going to ruin my business. And since it's come in, he's now actually a big fan, and the council kind of wheel him out to speak to other people when they're objecting. Castle Farm Road, things like that have been done. Is it a case that you have to hold your nerve when you're doing these things frequently? But I think there's a case for all councils of all stripes have a tendency, all people do it, but all people in authority have a tendency to say, oh, well, look, we've made the decision. And by far the best way to do it is to bring other people who've been through the journey to talk to them, and not necessarily frequent, literally to knock on the doors, but film some videos of people saying that we were opposed to this, but now we've done it. It's actually quite good. And I think that's part of the route through. Alison, UBI, it definitely needs to be addressed. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware there's lots of questions on it. How high would you set the level? What would you do about the tax system, which is absolutely key. But when we're talking about the just transition, a key part of this is actually the proper training courses and skills training. We absolutely need to get rid of this idea, and this is an argument that has to be won, and it hasn't yet been won, that somehow it's now the individual responsible for paying for their training and marketing themselves as a commodity. In a rapidly changing world, that doesn't work, never mind the morality of it. And that requires properly funded adult education, as well as school-age education, and free university education as well, of course, because that's the only way it's going to happen, is that opportunity to retrain at various points throughout your life without taking a massive loan and a risk. The basic principle of business is you take a risk, you get the full rewards of it. That's not happens when you become an employee. We've now got people taking the risk, but without getting the rewards if they join an industry that happens to be very successful. Getting the public on board, Vicky, yeah, I entirely agree. So we've been running the Mayor's Challenge on the climate emergency in schools. So we've got in primary schools, we've got people going and do things like soil analysis, biodiversity counts around their area. Secondary schools working with engineers to tackle real world climate problems. Tertiary education, doing developing computer games that simulate the climate emergency and getting them involved with games developers. So often the case that when it was, for example, dealing with smoking, you deal with the kids and actually the parents tend to follow. So that's part of it. And we have the crowdfunders. Zero carbon, zero poverty, and there's people tracking salmon going up the Tyne. There's things like the community gardens, the food gardens, and it is dealing with the food poverty at the same time, because it is generally that polarization tends to be whipped up in terms of culture wars of often very rich people saying, oh, you people are poor, and these middle class people, they want to make you poorer. And you have to say, look, this actually speaks to the real issues you're facing. And show them a route through.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jamie. Let's come to Lorna next. You don't have to take all the questions. You can take a pick of the bunch. Which ones would you like to go for?
Right. Okay. Just on low traffic neighbourhoods, firstly, and funding and implementation of active travel. I think one of the things that we have suffered from is during COVID was a government that shoveled out parcels of money and said, here, do this and do it by next Thursday. Which meant that you weren't able to take people with you from the outset, consult widely, and do things properly and in a considered way. And I think that has led to potentially badly implemented schemes without a lot of forethought in some cases, and no time to build a local consensus around them. And I think that has been a problem in some parts of the country. And it also brings its own punishment with it if you relent in the face of public pressure. We had a situation in Cambridge where there was a very controversial closure of a road to passing vehicular traffic, and there was a lot of noise about that. And the administration, the joint administration, by a very slender majority, said, okay, we'll reopen the road. And I think that was not a good thing to have done. I think, persisting and making the arguments would have been a better course of action. And as I say, it brought its own punishment, because it meant that in the latest round of funding, we the combined authority of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, came out very, very badly. And I think that if we don't do it and stick to our guns and do it right, then we have problems with central government funding to do what we need to do. So I think it's a difficult area, but I think that the moral really is get the consultation right and don't rush. The trouble is the government, I don't think, quite sees it that way. On the issue about the public, yes, it's absolutely critical to engage the public with this, because we can talk as local authorities about our own emissions, our own scope 1 and scope 2 and so on, but our scope 3, the services that we procure from outside, are other people's scope 1 and 2s. They're the scopes 1 and 2 of local businesses who supply stuff to us, national businesses that supply stuff to us, and they've got to get the message and get the confidence. And for a lot of businesses, I think it's about a lack of confidence about having the information, and having the information that is neutral and that doesn't come with an agenda, somebody trying to sell you something. And I think that there is still a view of local government as being potentially in that situation, a kind of honest broker, and supplying neutral information to businesses to give them the confidence to know what it is they need to do to go forward, and the public more generally as well. Some of the parishes in my area have started, they've declared their own climate emergency, and they've started work on their own climate and carbon reduction plans, which is brilliant to see. One tool I don't know whether people have seen is the impact tool, which is really fantastic for seeing a vision of the carbon footprint of your own small community, parish by parish, which is just fantastic to see, because it shows you where the differences are. And if you look at those diagrams and figures, it shows you it gives you a picture of what the drivers are really locally in your area. And I think that there's an immense power in that particular tool, that if we can use that productively with our communities and with our parishes, we can help them to understand the drivers of their own carbon footprints and how those can be addressed.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lorna. Moving on to Katie, anything you want to pick up from those questioners?
Yeah, there are a couple of the points. The LTNs I think is really interesting, because I would certainly reflect what Lorna's just said, which is don't give up too soon. And we haven't named them LTNs anyway in Richmond. We've got a school street and another area that we're protecting, the local residential street. And we've had a lot of hassle with both of those, but we've over-communicated and communicated again. With the Transport Committee on one of those has met 3 times to discuss it and make amendments to it. So we've listened to people's resistance and why they don't like it. We've tried to address the things that are a core, and that we can almost get some people who were against it over to being for it, so that the group who are still against it are much more isolated in it. So we've persisted with both of them, and one of them has really calmed down. And I would say that in actual fact, if you speak to a lot of the people who are against it, they're now in favour of it. The other one's still ongoing, and it's still to be seen, but we've put in some amendments to it, and we will review it again in 6 months' time, but we haven't got rid of it. And I would say the 20 mile an hour is very similar. Our experience on that is we were attacked by the Tories on 20 miles an hour over and over and over again, the whole way through the administration and at the time of the elections. Now, in actual fact, the support from other places was really powerful. We never ever had any issues across with Labour or the Green Party at all in any of that, making political points. But in actual fact, we went out and did a piece of market research, and it's a vocal minority quite often who are very, very loud. And when we did the analysis of the 20 mile an hour, the independent research, we found that a majority of people were actually in favour of it. They just don't write into us every day and tell us about it, or write to the press and get really, really angry and do protests. Most people are actually there kind of going, yeah, I think it's probably all right. I'm certainly willing to give it a shout. So that then comes on to the whole communication and getting the community on board, which I absolutely agree. The point on that, we've spent an awful lot, we haven't got it all right yet. We have a lot more to do, but things like the Climate Week, communications, putting out information into public spaces of what we're doing and why that makes a difference, because people want to do the right thing. Most people want to do the right thing for the climate. They just don't really know what they should be doing, and I think helping them on that journey is really, really important. And just on the point of the Progressive Alliance, just before I finish, I don't see it as a progressive alliance between just political parties, and I think if it was just a progressive alliance between political parties, then we'd be in with a problem. But we are talking to lots and lots of groups who have an interest in this, and lots of groups who aren't necessarily formalized groups, but groups of parents and things like that who have an interest in the place being right for their children. So I think working with people who are in those formalized and less formal groups, the way we've been working on the active travel strategy, things like that, is a much more kind of way I would see the Progressive Alliance moving forward. And that then takes away from it being kind of a group of politicians versus a different group of politicians.
Absolutely. 100% agree on that. And we at Compass are very, very pro the idea of a Progressive Alliance being just more expansive, because in also different parts of the country it's more applicable than others, but just all sides of alliances that are relevant for this sort of action and to make transformative change. So Claire, over to you. Any of those questions you pick up briefly to make sure that we get a second round of questions in?
I don't want to be going over what people have already said, but in terms of getting the public on side, the thing is that the more you continue to collaborate and to cooperate with each other, I think we prefer the term kind of cooperative. What people in your area start to see is that this is, and in fact, a kind of a more grown-up and sort of healthier form of politics, and so it starts to generate its own momentum. Because instead of having kind of polarized camps who are sort of sniping at each other, what you see are people who are green, Liberal Democrat, Labour and independents who are actually able to have sensible conversations and compromise and debate with each other, but always keeping it civil and not this kind of shouty Oxford Uni in the way that Westminster seems to be most days, and that then the public start to see that you are working in the public interest, And so that then comes back to what I was saying at the end of my presentation, that this then adds value, because then people say that you're not actually the party political people, you are sort of, working towards a kind of a common goal. And so in terms of, bring one of the other questions, like who is objecting to things. So we've also had similar issues getting, our 20 is plenty passed. I mean, so we, at the town level, for example, here in Godalming, have passed that. The issue is, getting it through the county council, who are the highways authority, and who are still, majority Tory controlled. But you do, you see kind of, shouting and sniping about that on the, various kind of social media, Facebook boards, etc. I'm sure you all have your local equivalents. And a similar thing with the Guildford Godalming Greenway, which is really, really necessary for active travel, just because it's going to be connecting. Guildford is a major town, and it needs a sort of a safe active travel route as well. But when we opened up the initial phase of the consultation, part of the proposed route was going to be running through Godalming along our Lammas lands, along the river, and obviously we have environment officers who are looking at that and doing it in the most environmentally sensitive way. They've sort of looked at comparable things that are done on national trust properties and wetlands, etc., where you can actually have boardwalks, etc. And what we discovered was that there was a very, very vocal opposition, and it was essentially kind of astroturf thing. As Katie was saying, that there were a number of very vocal people who were kind of like geeing up other locals. And it's being driven by an agenda that is kind of having a pop at you because you're the administration, but it's a very small minority who are not necessarily representative of the vast bulk of people. And as Katie was saying, most people, they think, oh yeah, I quite like that idea. I don't know if I can be bothered to respond to the consultation, but yeah, that sounds good. So when you actually ask them, when you're doing your door knocking and your canvassing, people say, yeah, sure. But it's the very vocal ones who are out there saying, oh, the car is king, etc. Blah blah blah. So yeah, I don't know if I had anything else I particularly to add.
No, that was great. Thanks, Claire. And I think just giving that sense that actually it's not everybody who's anti this. Steve, I'm going to come to you in just a sec, but I'm really keen that we're just going to squeeze in one more quick round because we promised our questioners, and then I'll ask you all to just have one answer to one of the questions. So listen carefully to this next round, and then just pick one of the questions to answer. So we're going to hear from David, Laurie, and I think rarely another Francis. Let's take David first. David, I know you had a question specifically, I think, about Richmond. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? David, are you there? If not, we will move to Laurie. Laurie, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. It's very interesting, and there's tons of great work being done at the local level, which I acknowledge. But realistically, we need national government money, policy, regulation. So I would like to know how the panelists plan to avoid full social polarization, another Brexit, if the climate coalition continues to be messaged as the progressive coalition, because this is an issue that we can't get by with 55% of the country. We need, 80 to 90%. And I would like to know where they stand with regards to the Climate and Ecology Bill, which is a private member's bill tabled by Caroline Lucas back in the fall of 2020. It also includes meaningful citizens' participation through a citizens' assembly without changing the rights of the MPs or our government.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laurie. Great, thanks so much. And yeah, the CE Bill work are doing amazing work. So anybody who wants to find out about those, Laurie, it'd be great if you could stick the link in the chat as well. Let's go to Francis. Francis, do you want to meet yourself and ask your question? Nice to see another Francis on the call. Hopefully we can hear from you as well. I'm not sure if we've got you. So why don't we take David and Francis' question? How about I read out Francis' question and Samuel can read out David's. So Francis says, that in the Northeast, there's no comparable body to Climate Co-op or People-Powered Retrofit, which are in the Greater Manchester area. And she noted that you were happy to be pictured with Andy Burnham, but we desperately need an advisory body in the Northeast to advise and help people on retrofit. So I think there's a specific question to you, Jamie, about whether there are any plans afoot for thinking about retrofit, especially taking the example from Greater Manchester. And we have a question from David as well. Samuel, do you want to read that one out from David?
Yes, he wanted to raise the question for Richmond, so I believe that's for you, Katie. Lots of good initiatives to reduce carbon emissions. Are there equal actions for absorptions as well as emissions, and are there calculations for both so that you arrive at net zero in 80 years?
Whew, okay, a good crunchy series of 3 questions there. Let's go the other way around, or actually just a random order that I'm going to pick. Let's take Katie first, and then go Lorna, Claire, and back to Jamie at the end.
So yeah, I will take the Richmond question. Yes, the answer is yes. I focused on the ones I knew most about during the presentation, but we have a huge programme of tree planting across the borough. There's biodiversity action plans that also should support the absorption over the next 8 years. And that certainly should be, there's a lot in there to bring about the absorption, particularly in the local schools areas where we are very conscious that that is one of the best ways of reducing or improving the air quality, but also reducing carbon emissions.
Excellent and beautiful, concise, straight to the point. Thanks, Katie. Let's come to Lorna next.
Right, I'll take the social polarization one because I think that is a really important one. And Cambridge is already quite a polarized place, and we've heard a lot about the national culture wars going on in politics. There is very much a sort of a metropolitan elite in Cambridge versus the rural hinterland, and I absolutely don't subscribe to that. I am a Cambridge graduate who lives in the rural hinterland, and I love and respect both parts of our wonderful county. But there is that feeling in some quarters, and it can make things very difficult. And I think if climate change and concerns about the climate emergency are portrayed as being the concerns of the avocado eating elite of the ivory towers of Cambridge, then we're all on a loser. I represent part of the county that is more at risk of flooding than anywhere else because most of it is so low lying. A lot of it is under sea level, and we have the river 6 feet above. And we've got to be really careful about maintaining the barrier banks, which are being worked on as we speak, to keep the water at bay and keep it channeled on its way out to the wash. But ironically, it is in some respects the politicians who represent that area that is most at risk from flooding and has most to lose from the impact of climate change, the agriculture and so on. It is those politicians representing those areas who seem to be so resistant to the idea of climate action. And I think that's where the community comes in. I think particularly it's where children and young people come in. And I think we've just got to work out how we get over the heads of the politicians who are standing in the way in some places, and build alliances with communities in those areas to make sure that their voice is heard, because they are as concerned about the effects of climate as the rest of us.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's the way around, right? If you can't find the way through the political parties, you go to the community and civil society, which we should be doing anyway. Claire, and I wondered if you wanted to see to Steve on this round, just because I was very able to get Steve in before. Thank you very much for showing our alliance in action.
If Steve is able to.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to take up any of those questions really briefly? Because I know we're all running very, very slightly.
Hi, yeah, because the only reason I was on this call was because I thought Claire may not be. So I'm sitting in the lay-by. No, I mean, I'll just pick up the one point that was made. And I think it's a really, really important point in terms of, building a progressive coalition as opposed to the non-progressive coalition or whatever else we call it. How can we, even if we are successful, avoid the continuing Brexit divide? And I think that's a really very good question. And I think the answer does lie in, you know, part of the other question about Caroline Lucas's bill, which is around building participative, deliberative democracy and actually engaging people from the bottom up. And it's not just kind of top-down governance. And that, I think, is absolutely critical, really important, and something that we've got to continue to build. But I think the other part of that answer is if that you do politics differently, certainly in the way that we do politics in Waverley, it actually has its popular appeal. As Claire said earlier, when you knocking on doors and people understand that here, you know, Labour, Liberal Democrats and Greens don't tear pieces out of each other. They collaborate, they work together, they resolve differences, and they solve those differences by creating creative policies. And I think that has you know, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, or whatever the expression is. In other words, there's added value, because, you know, the one thing that I keep going back to is that very first meeting when we had the members of the Waverley Executive sitting round the table after we'd created this incredible transition from total Tory dominance to, you know, a progressive majority on Waverley Borough Council. As I sat round the table with the other members of the executive, it was just like sitting at one of our Compass local, Southwest Surrey Compass local group meetings. And therefore, you know, we didn't, you know, we were talking to each other, we were listening to each other, and we had the trust. And actually, that's a really good basis for strong coalition.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve. And Steve is one of our amazing stalwarts down in South Surrey as well. So thank you so much. Finally, over to you, Jamie. Any questions you want to take up from that final round? Ideally, pick one, but I understand there was one that was quite directed at you. So if you also want to mention the CEU bill, that's definitely up to you as well.
Okay, thanks. On retrofit, one of the questions somewhere in the chat was about, is it just about money? Money is a necessary but not sufficient condition for fixing these problems. So if we talk about retrofit, there's a massive issue about if we've got enough people, is the supply chain there, if we're going to do it in the time available. We funded a piece of work that looked at retrofit in detail, looked at all of that. We've highlighted 140,000 homes that need retrofit as a priority. We haven't got the money to do it. But we didn't want to be the case that when the money comes available, we didn't then want an extra delay of how we're going to do this. There's an issue, though. You can't just suddenly retrofit 140,000 homes. So one of the things I've been asking for is the power to regulate private landlords. And if you were to say that you can only let your home out if you've hit the right energy efficiency category, then I can say, well, look, you must retrofit the home necessarily, low carbon heating, insulation. But I'll give you the money, and you have to pay it back over time from the increasing value on the property, from the fact that you can rent it for a higher value, that your people are saving energy bills on it. So these are the sort of powers and infrastructure, the organisational infrastructure that's needed to make this work. So that's one of the things we're on with. Yes, I support the bill. Actually, quite a lot of people on different parties do. Clive Lewis is a good friend of mine, is very keen. He's supporting it as well. In terms of how do we deal with the polarisation, tell the truth. It's funny that the Tories in my council, in my cabinet now back me and agree with me on the climate things, and that's because you move into this space, you're bold about it, and then rather than backing off on all these issues, people then say, well, we agree with it as well because we want people to vote with us. So yeah, just go for it.
That is real leadership, and once again, like a rousing spirit on which to end. So I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. I want to say thank you to Lorna, to Katie, to Jamie, and to Claire, and to Steve for having that amazing cameo in a lay-by. That's true Compass membership support for you right there. And to everybody who came on the call tonight, I really appreciate it. I know it's beautiful weather out there, so for all of you who did show up, that's great. Two things to say. So firstly, this event is being recorded. We'll stick it up on YouTube for those of you who wanted to see back those amazing quick fire, gunge-inducing game show style presentations. We run events like this all the time. If you don't know about Compass, please do join us. We are very much behind this agenda. We're behind the alliance building that needs to be done to tackle the climate crisis. And we try to run events of this kind very often. So please tell your friends, please reach out to other people who might be interested in our work. Do check out the Rapid Transition Alliance. They have some really amazing short films on the sorts of things that are being done post-pandemic on the idea of a reset around work, living, consumption, all of these amazing ideas. And they're really practical and focused on what you can do and what individuals and businesses and teams can do. So actually that is something that I've been finding a really big source of inspiration in the last few months of the work they've been doing. So yeah, a huge thanks to the panelists, a huge thanks to everyone here tonight. Please do go off, enjoy the evening, get some vitamin D if the sun is shining where you are, and join us again for another session very, very soon. So huge thanks to everyone and good night.